Should we move the projector thing down a little bit more? Oh no, I messed it up.
Go in.
Go in like this? So down and in?
In. That's all you got.
Oh.
Oh no.
Can you give me a hand before I screw this up anymore? Oh. Wait. Okay, we're good. We're good. We're good. All right. This cord's really long. All right. Hey, how's it going, guys? So last week I gave a presentation on like Windows basics, and I'm back again this week. So if you really hate Windows, I'm really sorry. You're going to hear more of me, and you're going to hear a lot more of me throughout the year. And I'm sorry. But this is actually a presentation I gave for my class, I think last semester. It was for Net and Sys Audit, and my whole project was based around Windows persistence. And the end goal of that project was to like basically have like a what do you call them? Like a producible, or basically I wrote like a program, a service, which we'll talk about more later in the presentation. But it's going to say like our service and stuff like that, and basically make it sound like there should be another person up here. That should have been my partner for like last semester in that class. So just like an FYI when you read the slides, if it's confusing. So let's just hop right into it. So this is like Windows persistence, like 101, we'll call it. So we're going to start with the basics, right? Starting off, schedule tasks. So who here is like went into a schedule task and actually looked through like all the tasks that are like by default in Windows? Who's like looked through those? So we got some hands. That's good. That's good. Yeah, there's a lot of like junk in there that really is garbage, right? And so when you go in, you look at it first, and you're just like sifting through it. There's a lot of stuff in there on like a default installation. So this is like a good like first place to start with persistence in Windows. You can run as really any user. The best part about schedule tasks is that you can run as local system. So let's say, for example, you have a schedule task that runs every hour, and it like calls back, it's a binary that like calls back to your like C2. You can have it run as like local system, and even if a user is not always logged onto the box, the schedule task will always run. Now, just as like a reference, the local system account is similar to like the root account in Windows. We went over that last week, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but they're really similar. Schedule tasks are really similar to cron jobs in Unix. So again, they're going to run tasks after like a certain amount of time. Even in Windows, you can set it to, I'm pretty sure, like when a user logs on or something like that. So they're pretty good. But then again, they're not like the most powerful thing, because I know like for CCDC, when I'm like first hopping on a box, right, the first thing I do is like clear all my scheduled tasks. So if that's like your only form of persistence, you're probably going to stay on for like all of like a second. So not really that great, but something to note. So shares and SMB. SMB is like really vital to any Windows operation, right? And you can use shares to essentially like exfiltrate data, or if you make a share, like for example, you can use like psexec to connect to shares remotely and get like a remote shell. So we kind of talked about that last week, and kind of using psexec to remotely connect to computers and get like command prompts. But it's a great way to maintain persistence. So if you have a user on the box, connect to it through SMB, get a shell. There's also a more sneaky version of psexec called SMBexec. I believe this is written in Python, and essentially the stealth part of it is the fact that so stepping back here, psexec is very loud. And it's very loud because it installs a service on the box, and the default name of that service is like psexecv. And that service is how psexec executes commands as local system, or the user that you're trying to authenticate with or use. And essentially, SMBexec takes it a step further, and every time you try to run a command, it'll install that service, but then after the command is finished, it'll uninstall a service. So that way, when you disconnect from the box, the service isn't left over as an artifact. Because otherwise, if you're using psexec, the service is going to stay on the box. And obviously, if like an IR person is coming back on, or you're a blue team and you're looking at your services, you're going to say, what the heck, there's a psexec service on my box. I haven't used psexec to connect to this box. That's bad. So it's like kind of a dead giveaway if someone's like remotely connected to your box. So SMBexec is a good way to get around that. So moving on. There's some miscellaneous things. Backdoor shortcuts, I mean, that's pretty like straightforward. It's like 5th grade stuff, right? You just like point the shortcut to a different location to your malicious binary. So you have like Chrome on your desktop, and then you point it to your malicious binary. Someone goes to browse the internet, and boom, they're hacked or pwned or whatever. You can backdoor sticky keys. This is a little bit more involved after like Windows 10 and onwards because of the trusted installer account taking ownership of all the files in System32. So if you want to actually backdoor sticky keys, which the binary name is like sethc.exe, you actually have to take ownership of the file, which you have to go through the GUI, and it's just a real like pain. And you can also use like command line tools like take own, and now allow you to take ownership of the file. But this is actually a really good one. So if you can actually, there's something on my GitHub too where I have a script to set all this up, but you can actually like set this RDP like authentication or the RDP, what is it? I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's like the RDP level or something along those lines. Set it to 0 in the registry, and that'll allow you to get like a login screen through RDP from the get-go, and you can actually access sticky keys through that. So if you have sticky keys backdoored, you can get like a local system shell without actually like authenticating or logging onto the box. And it's just a great way to keep persistence because you don't have to have a user on the box. You can just keep RDPing onto the box, set, or press sticky keys, do shift 5 times, and you already have a shell. So it's a really easy way to get back on. And then from there, obviously, your local system, you can just create your own user, do whatever you want. What else? Yeah, so gathering registry hives. So in the registry, there's like hives for like the password for the SAM database. And the SAM database is the essentially stores a lot of the account information. And you can, if you combine the SAM and system registry hives, which you can use a tool like SAMDump2, which is like default on Kali, you can combine these two and get the NTLM hashes, and then you can just do like a patch to hash vulnerability and get back in the system that way. All right, so moving on. Registry. Oh boy, the registry, my favorite. Just kidding. So the registry is pretty much a mess in Windows. It's pretty hard to navigate, but there's a lot of great places to hide in it because it's a mess and because people don't really want to sit there and like sift through it. So the first, and like honestly, like a lot of malware these days still uses these, is the run keys. Mainly because the run keys are really easy, they work, and frankly, if you don't know Windows, you're not really going to check them. So a lot of current day malware and just red teamers will use these. And so the difference between these two is that these are going to run at like a local system level, while these are just going to run at the level of whatever user's logged in. So just important to know the difference between these two. There's some more run keys I believe also run a system. But yeah, run keys are great. They're really easy to pick up though if you know what you're doing. So if there's a system internals tool called autoruns that you can just download, you can open up, and it'll just like literally show you all the registry keys that will run, or basically potentially malicious registry keys. Not everything in autoruns is malicious. Actually, most of it's probably not. But it can detect run keys pretty easily. So if you think someone's hijacked your run keys, open up autoruns, and you can just look at all the run keys right there in front of you. There's different ways to hide. There are ways, to hide from autoruns, but they're pretty advanced, and most people don't do it. At least, like current day malware doesn't do it. So some more registry stuff. App-init DLL, super interesting one. So app-init DLL will actually allow you to, if I remember correctly, because it has been a while since I've given this presentation, it'll allow you to actually hook like calls, like WinAPI calls in userland. So starting in Windows 7 though, Microsoft was like, yeah, this is probably like not a good idea to kind of have this by default. So in Windows 7 and onwards, they actually require you the app-init DLLs to be signed. So you can't just like blatantly hook WinAPI calls. But you can just turn it off through the registry, so that's really dumb. I don't know why they do that. So if you just go set this registry key, which I don't remember the location off the top of my head, but there is this registry key, set that to 0. You don't have to have signed DLLs or to use app-init DLLs. So, and by the way, does everyone know what like a DLL is? DLLs, dynamic linked libraries. So dynamic linked libraries are just like basically, what's the best way to think of them? Sort of like shared objects in Linux, if that's what their name is. But essentially they have like different functions that are exported, and other programs can call them. So that's the best way to describe it. Hopefully that was a good enough explanation. But if you put DLLs in app-init DLLs, again, and you export the right functions, you can use that to hook WinAPI calls. An important note, if secure boot is enabled, App init DLLs are going to be disabled. There's nothing you can really do about that. So yeah, secure boot's really good. And you'll find that secure boot actually stops a lot of different like tricky persistence methods. So if you don't have that set up on your home box, I'd recommend it. Services. All right, I love services. This is going to be fun. So let's talk about like a crash course on services. So services as a whole, you have at the top level, you have the service control manager. And service control manager just like manages all of the other services in Windows. So all services have to like report back to the service control manager at like a certain point in time. And when they're starting up, they also have to do some like fun stuff with the service control manager. And then there are service accounts, which each of the services actually run as. So there's like 3 like really basic service accounts that you'll see most of the time. So local system, which we already kind of talked about. It's like the root account for Windows. Local service and network service. Local service and network service, not really going to talk about them because their permissions are pretty bad in terms of like if you're like a red teamer trying to maintain persistence on a box, they're shit, honestly. So just don't use those accounts. So stick to local system, sorry. But yeah, services essentially just perform background tasks on a box. So it's going to like a real service, right, is going to run like RPC, like it's going to allow you to use RDP, terminal service. So it's going to perform those kind of tasks, right, and keep those programs up and running. Another important thing to note about services is the SVC host. I can't remember who it was, but someone actually asked me about SVC host, like the meeting I did the Windows presentation. And all SVC host actually is, it's just like a shared binary for services to use, so they don't actually consume enough or a lot of resources on the box. So Microsoft basically uses SVC hosts in service groups to run a bunch of services under one binary. So if you see, like, if you open up like Task Manager and go like details, you'll see like a ton of SVC hosts. It's not like malicious programs or like they're not viruses. Like I think if you Google it, if you Google like SVC host, like the first result you get is like, is SVC host a virus or something like that? Like, no, it's not. It's like a default Microsoft thing. However, you can actually run your service under SVC host if you set it up correctly. You have to do a lot of registry magic to actually get that to work, and it's pretty tricky. So most people don't do it if you're, you know, yeah, it's hard, but you can, just a note. So it's not that SVC host is always going to be safe, but for the most part they are. So, oh wait, I forgot something. Yeah, and so SVC host basically, what the registry magic I was talking about is you have to set values in the registry, and it requires you to have like a DLL that exports like certain functions that are required by SVC host, so it knows basically where to look for your like main function and stuff. All right, so how can we abuse services? Well, the first part is we can actually write our own, which is really awesome. I'll talk about that later, and it's what I did for this project, for this class. And yeah, but other than writing your own, how else can we abuse them? So first we can load binaries, like any binary as local system, and just start the service. This binary doesn't have to be like conform to the specifications that the service control manager requires. So if you just throw in like interpreter binary, for example, you can still run it. The service will die, but the binary will still be run as local system. So you'll still get that like local system privileges. Important thing to note though is you do have to actually have to configure a service to do like sc config. You have to be administrator. So again, this is persistence. This isn't like you're exploiting your like guest user and you configure the service. Unless the permissions are like mad screwed up on the box, it's not going to work. And yeah, you can also, wait, when I say break services, oh, so you can break services, sorry. I'm like trying to remember what points I talked about when I was actually giving this presentation the first time. So you can break services using different accounts. So if you just like go into, say you want to like shut down like RDP for whatever reason and just like, so no one can actually start it, you can just change the account from like, it's probably like local system or something to like something random and it will just break. And so when they go to do like sc start and then the service name, or they go into services.msc and try to start it, the stuff isn't going to start. So just like a fun little thing. And you'll see that like red team, blue team competitions too. So, all right, so group policy. This would be a quick one. So group policy, talked about that in Windows 101. But essentially, group policies allow you to spread configuration options throughout a domain. So you can just use that to your advantage as a red teamer, right? If you own the DC, you can just set group policy to install run keys on on all the computers around the network's boxes. And so, boom, you can push that group policy, and now everyone you have persistence in like every box in the network. So group policy is a good way to like propagate persistence across a domain. So, and some other fun things, you can like downgrade authentication from like NetLM, which is like, I think it's like the current is like NetLM version 2, maybe 3. I think it's 2. But you can downgrade that to LM, which is like easily crackable. And so if you capture those hashes going across the network, what's up, Ben? Yeah, so LM hashes, if you see them going across the wire, right, you can just you can sniff them and you can crack them. They're really easy to crack. So what are you gonna say? That's a really good one. Yeah. So another one is who here knows what golden tickets are? I hope you do. I'm really bad at explaining them, so I'm actually gonna avoid explaining what golden tickets are. But that's a cop out. Sad, I know. But yeah, golden tickets essentially allow you. The basis of it is allow you to. You can authenticate with basically any box around the network using that golden ticket. It has to do with Kerberos. It would do like a presentation. I should do like a presentation on it so I can research it myself and actually understand it. But yeah, so that's group policy. Woo. All right. So drivers, yay. So let's talk about drivers. So drivers are really fun because obviously they allow this like how. Drivers are the way that the Windows system kind of interfaces with the kernel. So when you load a driver, that for the most part, unless they're like a userland driver, they're going to be interfacing with the kernel. The code's going to be running in kernel mode, and that's great for you if you're a red teamer. You really want to load a driver, or that should be like your ultimate goal, right? Is to get in the kernel land because then you essentially own the host if you have code running in kernel land. So some of the fun things you can do is like hooking. So you can hook all the system calls and say they're looking for like a process, right? And you just like hook the system call and say, if the process name is malicious.exe, don't show this process. Obviously, a lot more complex than that. But you can do that, and now your process is hidden. So when they go to look at Task Manager, it's not there. You could also do something called DCOM, which is direct kernel object manipulation or modification. And that is actually modifying directly like the process object or like the thread object in the kernel land. So it's very similar to hooking, but you're essentially using that to hide your process, your connection, whatever it may be. And by the way, for kernels, I actually read somewhere, it's pretty interesting. You should never actually hook anything using like network connections, because network connections actually can be verified outside of the box. So say you're trying to hide network connections, it's a bad idea, don't do that. Again, it can be verified off the box. But yeah, there's some fun things you can do. So drivers like the ultimate thing, right? Wow, great. Not really. Drivers actually really suck. And I'll tell you why. The first is PatchGuard. So PatchGuard was a what do you want to call it? A technology that Microsoft implemented in Vista and onwards. So like XP was kind of like the Wild West. People were getting rootkits thrown in the box like left and right. Probably not, but something like that. And Microsoft was like, what the hell? Like, we need to do something about this. Our kernel is like completely unprotected and our security absolutely sucks. So let's try to fix this. So one of the first things they implemented was, actually I think it was like driver signing enforcement was the first thing. And it kind of started off as being pretty light. Basically all that it needed to be was your driver needed to be signed by like someone. Now in Windows 10, you actually have to have like a co-signing thing where you basically combine like a trusted vendor and Microsoft cert. So your driver has to actually go through approval of Microsoft before you can get it signed. So yeah, so if you can somehow get your rootkit past Microsoft to and get that signed, then you're good, right? So you can bypass driver signing enforcement. But then you got to worry about PatchGuard. And PatchGuard essentially protects a lot of the really important like tables in the Windows kernel and prevents you from, let's say, like hooking system calls or directly modifying like kernel objects. And that sucks, right? So that like stops you from doing a lot. Fortunately for us, like red teamers or APTs or whoever you are, PatchGuard it's really easy to get around it because Microsoft was really nice, and they said, well, people still need to hook our system calls, right? Like AV vendors still need to be able to hook system calls. They need to be able to like watch for processes. So how do we like protect our system tables, but also allow the people to do that? And so they actually implemented different functions in the like kernel API to actually hook system calls, but just how Microsoft wants you to do it. So thanks, Microsoft. And I think the function name, if you want to look it up and do some research on it, is called OB register callbacks. This will allow you to actually watch for certain actions on the box. So like a process created or like a thread created or whatnot, and you can basically act on this action. So if like a process gets created and it has a name like XYZ, do something, right? Either stop it from being created or something along those lines. So, but yeah, for the most part though, drivers, not really great for Windows. Excuse me, they, like I said, with all the 2 reasons right here, they're also really prone to failure. This little fun slide, right? The blue screen. Who's here had their blocks like blue screen the past like year for Windows? Yeah, I have. It sucks. Well, that's like the classic. I was like OG blue screen, you know. But yeah, drivers are really prone to failure, and like when your box blue screens, that's why. It's because of a driver. Code in user land can't actually make a box blue screen. It has to be in kernel land. So yeah, when you're developing drivers, that's a fun time, is counting how many times you can get your box to blue screen. So moving on. So if I wrote a service, I did, fun fact, what would I do? So why do I think services are like the greatest, or not the greatest, but like one of the better methods of persistence on a box for Windows, right? Well, first off, you have access to the Windows API. Windows API, for the most part, you can do just about anything you'd like. And you're interfacing pretty much at the lowest level you can without being in the kernel. So you have access to a lot more functions, especially if you're in C++. And yeah, you're just going to be able to do a lot. So some things you can do, some fun things you can do. You can add, your own autoruns keys using your service. So you can go through and just keep adding autoruns keys. You can also add users through it. You can add administrator users. You can add domain users. You can add firewall exceptions, right? All really fun stuff you can do through the API that my service may or may not do. So like I said, C++ allows direct access to the API. And compared to C#, C++ gives you a lot more fine-grained control over what you're doing or trying to do. So also an important note is Defender, right? Defender is really heavily signature-based. So since our service isn't like a common like malware that's being used all over, Defender's not going to care. It's going to be like, yeah, whatever, it's just a regular service. And again, because it's a service, we can run it as a local system account. So we literally have like most privileges. And if we don't have a privilege that we have, if we by default don't have a privilege, we can just give it to ourselves because we're system, and yeah, it doesn't matter. So, and then there's like future work, because again, this is like a class that I was doing, so I had to add that. But yeah, cool. So that is Windows persistence. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Oh, thank you.